Thank you, Dr. Goldhagen. We're now going to move to the question and answer part of the program. We started a couple minutes late, so we might roll a little bit later, about 15 minutes later. That's how late we started. I'd like now to introduce to you Professor Scharf, who will begin our Q&A part of the evening. Many of you know Professor Scharf as an internationally renowned legal scholar. Professor Scharf teaches, among many things, international law, international criminal law here at Case Western. Among his many awards and accomplishments, Professor Scharf co-founded the Public International Law and Policy Group, which has helped in the prosecution of major war criminals such as Slobodan Milosevic, Charles Taylor, and Saddam Hussein. He's also the U.S. Director of the Canada-U.S. Law Institute. Professor Scharf has served in the Office of Legal Advisor to the U.S. Department of State, where he has held the positions of Attorney Advisor for UN Affairs and Delegate to the UN Human Rights Commission. He's the author of over 70 scholarly articles and 13 books, and is the recipient of the Case Western Reserve University's School of Law Alumni Association's 2005 Distinguished Teacher Award. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I send it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to the other co-sponsors of this for inviting me to be part of this really extraordinary evening with Dr. Daniel Goldhagen. And can I call you Danny, since I know everybody does? This part of the program is a little bit like the actor's studio, so just think of me as James Lipton. I've tried to come up with some questions that will provoke and require you to stretch a little bit. So I want to start with the first one about the word genocide. And for those in the audience, you probably know that during World War II, what was going on was so vast, it beggared the imagination, and there was no word for it. In fact, Winston Churchill said that the crime that the Nazis were committing was the crime without a name. And so a professor, Raphael Lemkin, came up with a word. He combined the Latin phrase genos for race and cide for killing, and it now is referred to as genocide. It's a very powerful term, but sometimes it's so powerful governments don't want to use it. When I was at the State Department during the Bosnia atrocities and during the Rwanda atrocities, the US government did not want to use the term. And you've come up in your book and in the movie and in your speech with this other term, eliminationism. And I'd like to start out by asking you to comment on the use and value of the term genocide.
Language is, the reason we discuss this is because language is important for not only for conceptualizing what the phenomenon is, but actually in this case, as in many other cases, for mobilizing action or inaction. And so we want to use terms that are descriptively accurate, that are conceptually defensible, and in this case, since it's such an acute problem, that actually will mobilize people to act. Now, I think the term genocide is conceptually problematic and has been fraught with so many definitional battles of which you wouldn't be aware unless you're immersed in this field, both in the legal world and also in the political science and scholarly world, sociological world. It's mired in so many battles and it is so definitionally problematic in international law that I think it is not very helpful for analytical purposes. In other words, if you want to try to understand why people slaughter other people, the term genocide, which produces lots of debates, is this or is this not a genocide, gets in the way. Because what we really want to do is explain why people kill other people. And if they kill only 10,000 people, we want to explain that. It's bad enough, even if it wouldn't rise to the level of genocide according to someone's definition, according to the international legal definition. So for analysis, it's not useful, and it's not useful for a second reason, insofar as it sets off the killing from the other forms of eliminationist politics. I've already made the argument for why we should think of it as eliminationist politics. I won't make it again. So conceptually, analytically, it's a deeply flawed term, and in my book, I use it very few times. However, internationally, politically, and legally, and also in many societies, it's a very powerful and evocative term. It rouses people to action. It's the worst thing in the world. And so for that reason, I think we should use it in international in public discourse, and use it rather liberally and not be slavishly devoted to the most restrictive definitions, which is the slaughter has to be gargantuan, has to be target of people, I won't get into the details, target a large percentage of the people. I mean, there are debates about what it means exactly. Use it liberally. If a country is systematically slaughtering its people, let's call it a genocide and tell the world that this is the kind of thing that we must stop. Now, we had lunch together, and Michael asked me, well, don't you, again, if I may speak for you, well, are you worried about cheapening the term, about diluting its meaning? And my response to that is, although this is always a concern, right now it is a powerful mobilizer. We need to use it to try to get our countries, the international community, to do something. And once they start acting upon it, it produces a virtuous, self-reinforcing or recursive mechanism so that they will be more likely to use it, and states will be more likely to fear the use of the means to stop genocide. And once we get that in place, we can worry about whether the term is being diluted or not.
Excellent. When you wrote your path-breaking book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, there was some criticism which may have been misperceived in that you were saying that the Holocaust and the genocide in Germany was perhaps unique to Germany because of a cultural predisposition to violent anti-Semitism that had gone back 50, even 100 years. And the misperception may have been that you were saying that genocide was unique to Germany and it couldn't occur otherwise. And now you've written this book where you're looking at genocides that occurred in Cambodia, Rwanda, Guatemala, in many parts of the world. And I wonder, not to focus on what was unique about Germany, but what are the common elements that all of these genocides have in common? What have you learned now that you've looked in a broader lens?
Before I answer your question, I have to amend something that you said. You were right in that it was misperception, because in fact in Hitler's Willing Executions there's a comparative dimension in the book. There's a section of a chapter in which I discuss the genocide comparatively, and what I've argued throughout is that the purpose, and this is hardly an argument that is novel on my part, the purpose of the comparison is to elucidate both differences and similarities, and ultimately to explain both the commonalities and the variations among the phenomena that you're studying. And so the Holocaust has singular features that are not reproduced elsewhere, but it also has common elements, and I never once said that it's the unique genocide or the only genocide or nothing is like it. To answer specifically your question, all genocides, you can argue maybe a couple of exceptions here or there, but the overwhelming majority of them certainly have the common mechanism, which is they're started by political leaders who are governing states or who are insurgents with quasi-states, and things can change now. You can argue that 9/11 was an eliminationist, or if you want, even a genocidal assault or quasi-genocidal assault, done by a terrorist group or at that point a quasi-state or a group that is embedded in a state, Al-Qaeda. So there are new capabilities with nuclear weapons. But leave that aside. You have a common element, common mechanism, which is political leaders decide to turn private fantasies of hatred and killing into the core of public policy. They make the decision to enact genocidal politics, and they have followers that they can draw upon who will willingly kill, because almost in all cases, the genocidal killers, the overwhelming majority of them, kill willingly, and that these people are beholden to prejudices, hatreds, conceptions of the victims that suggest to them that the victims ought to die. It was true of the Germans during the Holocaust. It was true of the many people who helped the Germans around Europe. It was true of the Serbs against the Bosnians, the Hutu against the Tutsi, the Guatemalan government and those who supported against the Maya, indigenous people in Guatemala, and on and on and on. So this is the common mechanism. If you have both, and you have opportunity as well, opportunity created by the impunity of the international system, in part grants genocidal killers, you end up with genocide. If you don't have either of these elements, or you don't have the impunity, you don't have genocide or eliminationist politics. These are the common mechanisms.
Government control of the media. How important is that, do you think, in each of those cases?
It typically, if we look if we look at the instances of genocide, they occur mostly, overwhelmingly, in non-democratic countries, with the exception of colonial powers in their imperial realms, which you can certainly think of them as hardly being democratic in the places they're ruling. So they occur by dictatorships. They're perpetrated by dictatorships in which almost by definition the media is controlled, because that's how they are. So it's not that they have control of the media makes their job easier and facilitates the communication and also intensifying prejudices and so on, but it's not propaganda that suddenly turns people into the slaughter of children, as some people may think. One should say also that there have been instances of democracies committing genocide, including our own country, and one has to speak quite dispassionately about instances of genocide and speak truthfully about all instances. The first line of my book is Harry Truman, I now forget what number he was, whatever president of the United States he was a genocidal killer. And he was, because he knowingly dropped nuclear weapons, atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki for no good military purpose, knowing that he would slaughter an enormous number of Japanese men, women, and children who had nothing to do with war making. In fact, you should know that after the first one dropped, he said, "This is the greatest thing in history." I won't go through all the evidence to substantiate what I say, but it was quite clear it was unnecessary for the ending of the war. These were genocidal assaults, or genocides, if you want to call them that, done by a democratic country, and most Americans supported it. They did surveys about it, overwhelmingly supported it, and to this day, most Americans say it was the right thing to do.
We are both advocates of international justice, and you said today that you consider leaders to be rational thinkers, and if there really was a large likelihood that they would face justice, that they may have a different calculus before launching a genocide, maybe deterring them or their followers from doing so. Others have said that many of the leaders who have committed genocide suffer from what psychologists might call narcissistic personality disorder. So people like Saddam Hussein or now Muammar Gaddafi, in which case they may not be capable of doing that calculus. What's your response to that?
There are a whole set of objections that are made when you talk about genocide or preventing or stopping genocide or eliminationism that are of this form, which is, well, if it doesn't work here or it won't work all the time, what do you say about that? Or if you can't go in everywhere or bomb everywhere, and nobody wants to bomb everywhere anyway, and you can't stop the Communist China from doing what it's going to do, and you have to make exceptions to whatever you say, how can you contemplate this? And my response is the same to all of these, which is, let's stop the ones we can, let's enact the policies that can be successful in some places, because right now we're not doing it anywhere. And so maybe there won't be distributive justice, or there won't be perfect prevention or perfect intervention, and so we'll fail, but let's succeed in all the cases that we can. And if you couldn't stop Hitler, let's say, but I'll give you a lot of reasons to believe you could have stopped Hitler as well, and there is no greater exemplar of someone who was beholden to a wild, ideologically informed, hallucinatory view of the world, brimming with violence, desiring to slaughter people than Hitler. But and I think he could have really quite easily have been stopped. Nevertheless, even if you couldn't stop him or Saddam Hussein or whoever, Saddam Hussein, as you may know, slaughtered up to 500,000 people, Kurds, Shia, others, in Iraq long before we deposed him. So we won't be able to stop them, but let's stop the ones we can.
Another criticism I often hear about international justice is that we have too high expectations for what a courtroom can produce. And in fact, going back to Nuremberg, the United States did a series of opinion polls, which you may be aware of the German people in the 10 years following Nuremberg, in which about 90 to 95% of the German people said year after year they did not think the Nuremberg trial was fair, and they did not think Hermann Goering and the other Nazis were really guilty. Similarly, during the Milosevic trial back in Serbia, most of the Serbs felt he was being railroaded. The Charles Taylor trial has had a messy ending. A lot of people back in Sierra Leone and Liberia are thinking that he's not getting a fair trial. What's your response to the fact that these trials tend to be so messy and that, in fact, they might be more divisive than accomplishing the goals that we set for them?
You're right. Trials are complicated policy tools, if you think of them as policy tools, as opposed to being in the service of justice, whatever exactly justice means. And you rightly point to the unpopularity of the trials among the groups who supported or participated in, or whose countries participated in the mass slaughters in the first place. If you look at the victims and what they think and the countries they come from and what those people think about the trials, it's a very different story. They are enormously supportive of the trials. In fact, when I was in Guatemala doing the work for the film, I often asked the victims I talked to, what would you like seen done? They said, we want to see Rios Montt, the genocidal leader, who is in the film, by the way. I have a confrontation with him. And we want to see Rios Montt put on trial. I heard that again and again and again. We want the intellectual authors. It's interesting. That's how they talk about those who justified and ordered the genocidal killings. We want the intellectual authors of the genocide to be put on trial and to be punished. So I'm not as worried about what those in the countries of the people who supported or participated in the genocide think. I'm much more concerned with the victims. And the victims want the truth to be told. This is universal. They want the truth to be told. They want the perpetrators to be punished. And they want what happened to them to be used as a springboard for creating policy so it won't happen to other people. You hear that again and again and again. And they want the U.S. to intervene. This is very important. You hear from them, they say, why didn't your country do anything? You knew what was happening. We were being killed, and you and everyone stood by and did nothing. And so when people say, oh, who are we to intervene? Let the people free themselves. That's not what they say. They say, come and save us. It's what the Libyan rebels have been saying. Libya's complicated. I keep saying that. But that's what the people who are about to be slaughtered, who fear being slaughtered, say. Come and help us. Save our lives. One final word on the trials. In Germany, the Nuremberg trials were very unpopular and deemed to be illegitimate. Victor's justice, as it was called. The legal authorities of the Federal Republic of Germany, starting in the 1950s, began to systematically investigate and try Germans who slaughtered Jews and killed other people as well. Now, these trials were never very popular in Germany. They put a few thousand people on trial and put them in jail. They were never very popular in Germany. In fact, they were pretty unpopular in Germany. But they were accepted, and they were very important for German democracy, because the German government was showing the world and people in Germany that if Germans commit crimes, that they too must pay, and that they now live in a democratic society that respects the rule of law. And so while they were never terribly popular, they were accepted. There was no major protest against them. They were very effective. They were critical for German democracy. And they're critical also for educating the people. That's another function of trials.
What about the issue of trading justice for peace? In your speech and in the book and movie, you talk about al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, who's now been indicted by the International Criminal Court on genocide. And he has said, look, if you lift the indictment, I'll let the peacekeepers come in and they can protect Darfur, and I'll promise to not invade southern Sudan. And there's real concern that genocide might occur in those places as well. So the countries in Africa have unanimously now requested that the International Criminal Court, that the Security Council order the International Criminal Court to defer any proceedings on al-Bashir, trading that for peace. Do you think that's a huge mistake?
Just a footnote on the request of the African countries. The politics of the court, as you know better than I do, are rather complicated, and the court itself has been deemed to be not illegitimate, but to to be wrongly partial in the people and instances of genocide or mass atrocities they go after. Many the representatives of many African countries have complained that the court has gone disproportionately after leaders in Africa. And so there may be an element of politics in that request as well. But still, the issue is a real one. This is one of the problems of genocide. When you have killing on such a vast scale and you have such a catastrophe that is occurring or that can be renewed and continued, I mean, as I said before, whatever justice is, you can't even bring about something remotely approximating justice as you would in a country when someone kills somebody. You know what to do. You arrest them, you put them on trial, you put them in jail, or you find the right sentence, whatever that is. And there are conflicting imperatives. You want to punish people who commit crimes. You want to deter future crime or future killings on the part of them and of others. You also want to allow these societies to move on, and if there's still the threat of more killing, you want to forestall this. You can't do them all at once, because pursuing one end goes against another, and maybe goes against a third, and the constellation can be complicated. Another reason why it's too late once the killing is underway. Now, people and countries have taken different approaches. South Africa had truth commissions with the idea that it's better to try to get this out of the table, have the truth be told, and let's move on with the society's life. And in some ways it was very successful. In other ways it can be criticized. I tend to be on the side of punishing the perpetrators, because I think that long-term prevention deterrence has to be what we focus on. To the extent the international community does anything, it's always unbelievably short-term with no system, no long-term policies. What I would do in the case of Sudan is al-Bashir has been indicted, a few others have been indicted. I would go to his underlings and say, okay, he's been indicted, you guys are all next. And we'll put bounties on your head, put an end to this, hand them over. That's the way to square the circle in this case. And because otherwise you have the terrible choice. And I can't say it's the wrong one to put an end to the killing, but how do you know it won't begin again anyway?
Last question I have before we open it to audience Q&A involves a case that's near and dear to the hearts of Clevelanders. It's the case of John Demyemyak, this 90-year-old retired auto worker who spent many years in Cleveland as a more or less model citizen, has now been extradited to Germany, and he's in the middle of a trial. And in Cleveland, there's a real split of people who think, wow, when you're that old, you just shouldn't be prosecuted, and others who think, no, you're never too old to pay the price for these crimes. What's your response to that?
Well, first on Demyemyak, I think I'll just assume you know I think it's quite clear he was not Ivan the Terrible, the person he was first accused of being, and whom the Israeli Supreme Court said he was not, and acquitted him of that charge. I think it's also clear he was. Let me just add, I've never followed this case so closely, so I'm not an expert on it. I think it's also clear that he was a guard in a camp and that he is, in that sense, fit to be tried. I don't think there should be a statute of limitation on murder of any kind. You're just asking for what I think. I mean, we can argue the case. And I certainly don't think that there should therefore be a statute of limitation on killing vast numbers of people or participating in the slaughter of vast numbers of people. Time should not grant you immunity, and I don't see any argument for why it should. The typical argument that, well, witnesses' memories fade, we know there are problems with witness testimony anyway, documents get lost, chain of custody, this, that, the other thing, all that should be hashed out in the trial of whether the evidence is sufficient. Then the final question is, should we show clemency, or is someone ever too old to be put on trial? Well, I don't think so, not if you kill somebody. Talk to the victims. John Demyemyak lived many good years in peace, assuming he's guilty. He lived many good years in peace when he should have been in jail. That they finally caught up to him is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Just a footnote about bounties, because you're a strong advocate of that. Yesterday, Charlie Sheen was giving a presentation at the Palace Theater. Back when I was at the State Department, I was in charge of writing a PSA announcement for the terrorists' $10 million bounty program. And we got Charlie Sheen as the only actor who would do it. He had just been in a movie, Navy SEALs, and the TV commercial that aired all around the world in many different countries went something like this. Hi, I'm Charlie Sheen. In the movies, I play a hero, but in real life, heroes are ordinary people like you who turn into terrorists. Do something extraordinary. Be a hero, something like that. So anyway, the bounty program has actually been in, as you said, in force in a while. It was applied to the Milosevic case. Milosevic, they gave a $1.8 million IMF loan to Serbia in condition of him being surrendered. And that year, 1999, he was the #1 per capita export from Serbia.
But they've also applied it in the Rwanda case, but only in a very selective way, which is only to those who have already been indicted by the international tribunals. So not for crimes while they're doing it, or not certainly prospectively, and not even when they're suspected of having been strongly suspected of having participated in crimes. Remember, if there's a bounty on your head, all you have to do is turn yourself in to the court, and then you'll just face justice. It's easy not to be killed, and so it has been applied, but in this highly selective way to genocidal killers.
Now, we started 15 minutes late, so Marcus said that we should go to 9:15, which gives us 15 minutes for questions, and I'm sure a lot of you have some really important and insightful things that you want to ask Danny here, so please come up to the microphones and ask your questions.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. I have a quick question.
Please start off by identifying yourself as well.
Sure. My name is Ethan Brown. I'm a second-year law student at Case. You talk a little bit about, galvanizing people to identify that this is wrong. And I think myself, you, and many of the people in this room identify that this is wrong and terrible and we want to do something. But even just looking at the recent political landscape following the actions that Hillary Clinton and those at the State Department and those at the UN took to initiate this action against Libya, and the political hashback that's happened here in the States and after Iraq and all of these things, how can you make it a political? I guess I just struggle with making that a political, the idealism, making it a political reality of an important aspect of our daily life.
Okay. Libya is complicated for a lot of reasons, one of which is that we don't know a lot about what's going on. In the context of what I'm talking about, it's not at all clear that indeed it's pretty clear there wasn't a genocidal assault that was taking place, which doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. It's just not what we're talking about here. Even if Gaddafi uttered some very threatening words that led into a bloodbath and all of that. And it's not at all clear that what was moving us was humanitarian reasons anyway, but then it's not always clear that's what's moving countries to do good things. The good motives are not what's causing them to do good things. They have other reasons for doing them when they do. The problem with mobilizing support is twofold. One is, I think Obama did a terrible job of articulating what we're supposedly doing there, and he spoke the language of national interest. If you play the game of national interest, you're going to lose in this, because everybody can reasonably say there's no national interest as it's conventionally understood. You say, well, saving people is our values, it's part of our national interest. It's a very difficult case to make. It doesn't make sense. You have to speak the truth about what you're doing. You have to say this is a moral duty of our country. We have the power to do so. We're a beacon to the upon nations, if you want to use that language, and so on and so forth. And you fight the battle on those terms, not these bogus arguments that nobody believes. It just leaves you open to attack. If you don't say it, and the Republicans say it's not a national interest, say, fine, you have your understanding of national interest. This is a moral duty. And we can't let another Rwanda happen or whatever. So that's one thing. Second, we have to create the powerful political incentive to move the Obama administration or any subsequent administration forward to do the right thing, by making it clear that if they don't, if they let Rwanda or Bosnia or something happen that they could prevent, that they will forever be called abettors of genocide, that it will be on their political ledger. And I tell journalists, I get interviewed a lot, I say, look, you guys can do a lot. When you interviewed prime ministers, secretary, defense ministers, foreign ministers, secretary of state, what have you, ask them the following question. How many African lives have to be killed, have to be extinguished, before you say that number equals in value one American life or one French life or one so on and so forth? It's a gruesome calculus, but we have to make it. Get an answer from them. Get an answer for how they can stand by when people are slaughtered. Get them to explain why it's not their duty to do anything. And follow up and force them to answer. Turn this into a real issue. Don't throw them the softball questions. Because the media is complicit in all this. And also tell the truth about what's happening. It's not a civil war. It's not killings happening on both sides. The Yugoslavia mantra from the administration, the former Yugoslavia, well, they're just killing on both sides. Clinton said, we can't do anything until these folks just stop wanting to kill one another, which was ridiculous. That wasn't what was happening. Tell the truth. It's mass murder, it's genocide. One side is with overwhelming power, is slaughtering another side. If we stand by, we are culpable in this. Create a political groundswell, create a political support for doing it. You can all help do it. Change the political calculus of our leaders.
More questions. I hope you all have them. Start with yours.
Hi, I'm Ruchi Asher. I'm a first-year law student. My question was about, you said that just because we can't be effective every single time there's a genocide, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't intervene. But what sort of calculus do you make to decide where we're going to be effective and where we're not? And, everyone only has a limited number of military resources, so how and where do you draw the line, I guess is my question.
Okay. When I said we might not be effective in the sense that, I was just taking up what Michael said, which is, well, maybe Hitler would have done it anyway, or Saddam Hussein would have killed people anyway, and so on. I actually think that we would be overwhelmingly effective. And yet another reason why you want to focus on prevention is because you want to have a system in place that creates incentives for everybody equally and fairly. So everybody will know if I start killing the people in my country, this will happen to me. It doesn't matter what continent I'm in, what ethnicity I am, what level of development I'm at, my state is at, and so on and so forth. So you want it to apply in the same way that the criminal justice system works. Now, the criminal justice system fails in lots of ways, including there's crime in the country. But the way it works, the reason we have so much less crime is because everybody knows that if you commit a crime, there's a good chance they're going to come after you, and a reasonably good chance they're going to get you. And so all the crimes that even some of us in here might contemplate that we don't commit are not committed because the criminal justice system is operating automatically on all of us all the time. And so that's why you create a prevention system with an authoritative body that will trigger certain mechanisms if a genocide is suspected of being imminent or is suspected of occurring, which you can adjudicate rather quickly today with all of our technology. You trigger mechanisms, everybody knows they'll be triggered, and right then and there, just by that, particularly if it happens one time, it will change the entire calculus. The problem of having to go in everywhere or expending too many resources is not our problem. The problem is we don't do anything. We can deal with that problem if it comes about. And if that's the problem we have, that suddenly we're stretched, and who's the we, that's also a question, stretched too thin, going everywhere, and so on and so forth. I'm willing to deal with that later. Nothing is more radical and more devastating than the status quo.
I'm Marty Grundy, an alumna. You spoke about the seedbed of genocide, which is this eliminationism. And you spelled out the steps like a slippery slope that lead to it. And I can see seeds of this all over the world, including in our own country. And I wondered if you would talk about where you start stopping it before you get all the way to the end.
Okay. Well, one thing you do is you have these preventive measures. I won't repeat it all. But before I say that, I certainly agree with you. There are many, many countries in the world in which groups of people have images of other groups or other individuals in their society which suggest to them, ideally, it'd be better to get rid of them. And these can be called the beliefs they have, the prejudice they have, even hatreds they have. They're felt often very passionately. These hatreds, these prejudices lie dormant or issue in discriminatory acts, unpleasantness of all kinds, even worse, on a social level, on a personal level, and can be very disturbing. But as long as they don't get mobilized into politics, they will not have this eliminationist potential. They will not issue in this eliminationist programs. So the danger is, that's another reason to have general policies, because the danger, the possibility to mobilize people exists in many, many countries. Not in every country, and certainly not against every group, but in many countries against a lot of groups, and that's bad enough. So in your own society, so there are two issues. What do we do as an international community, and what do you do within your own society? And what you do within your own society is you remain incredibly vigilant. You educate people on the one hand, but you remain incredibly vigilant. Because these hatreds and prejudices are dangerous, but they become, as I said, truly dangerous when they become the basis for political mobilization. So what that means is that when people start speaking this language in politics, and when public figures start speaking this language, legitimizing it, spreading it, mobilizing it, we must react with, we must have an allergic and powerful reaction to it and say, these people are not fit for our public life. Keep them out of our public discourse. I'm sorry?
Arizona?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who are reacting allergically to that. I mean, this is what we have to do. And in this country, with all of our failings and with all the exceptions, people intuitively understand that. That is, many people of goodwill intuitively understand it. And that's why when people do speak, public figures do slip and say some of these things, not against every group, not all the time, there is an allergic reaction. And we have to universalize that. And we have to make sure that the groups that are not protected by this kind of reaction get incorporated into this understanding that we must not allow this. Finally, one more thing, internationally, the greatest thing we can do to prevent genocide and eliminationism is promote democracy. Seriously promote it, not pay lip service to it. Democratic countries, the exceptions notwithstanding, which have been mainly in the past, don't perpetrate eliminationist politics and genocide hardly ever in today's world, and certainly not on the scale of non-democratic countries. So the best thing to do is to have a serious program to support and sustain, and that doesn't just mean paying lip service and say have elections, democratic development and democratic institutions around the world. And the countries will be much better off if they have them that currently don't have them.
And you get the last question.
My name is Richard Block. We made reference to 9/11 and raised the possibility of using the same language with respect to that event. I wonder how does your analysis apply, and how do your solutions apply to non-state actors, where the whole mechanism is different and the whole opportunity to bring these forces to bear is very different?
Just another word about how to think about 9/11. I said it can be conceived of as a quasi-genocidal assault. They slaughtered 3,000 people, you know, and their intention was to slaughter a lot more. They were hoping that there would be a lot more people in the Twin Towers, and they would kill a much larger number of people. Does anybody doubt getting to non-state actors and the worst scenario? Does anybody doubt that if they had deliverable nuclear weapons, that they would have delivered them that day? Does anybody doubt that they would have detonated a nuclear weapon at the Twin Towers in New York City and another one in Washington? So the mindset was an eliminationist one, a genocidal one. They executed it as best they could at the time, but it clearly was Bin Laden, having a moment of difficulty there, Bin Laden has certainly articulated, as many other political Islamic leaders, an eliminationist orientation towards many people, including the United States. The problem with non-state actors is one that is growing, and particularly with the danger of nuclear weapons falling in their hands, and is not amenable, and what I propose here will not deal with them nearly as effectively, if at all, in the way that it will with state actors. Because, and sometimes people say, well, look, Saddam Hussein, not Saddam Hussein, Bin Laden did 9/11, and he didn't care. What makes you think the leaders of countries will? There's a big difference. Bin Laden and other terrorists have already made the decision to devote their lives or put their lives at risk to slaughter people and pursue their goals. They've already decided to go underground. They've already decided to take the action, to take these measures. The leaders of states want to live the good life. They want power. They're in political power. They have a much different orientation, a much different calculus about what they're willing to risk. Maybe not all of them, but certainly most of them. But all the more reason to think about promoting democracy seriously, so that the non-state actors have fewer havens and fewer places where they can develop their forces, and fewer havens for them to hide in. It's a terrible growing problem with which I don't think, as far as I know, are the leaders of the West and other countries have thought well enough about what to do.
I do want to thank our sponsors, Social Justice Institute, Dr. Rhonda Williams. Thank you so much for hosting us here this night. I also want to thank Michael Scharf. You do a great role up here of inside the actors studio, but you're a great educator. I don't know about you, my head hurts. And I think it's because I've been fed a lot of brain food, and you've given us, both of you have given us a lot to think about. And finally, Danny, thank you so much for being here and pushing our thinking. You said at the beginning you were going to be bold, clear, and filled with candor, and you certainly have lived up to that. So thank you very, very much. Thank you all for being here.